Hi, I'm Joe McKinney, and this is
Chris Gilchrist,
and Chris is the
youth pastor down at the bridge.
Right, and I am pastor of creative arts, and we're here on the final night of the Daniel series.
Yeah, you've made it.
That's right. We've arrived here. We had the last one, and our topic is out of Daniel 6, and it says, "Will you stand strong for God publicly?" And we get to look at how Daniel did that and what we can learn from him and how we can emulate him and be a great witness for God in the public arena. One of the little quotes I saw when I was kind of preparing for this was, will you be the kind of man or woman that when your feet hit the floor each morning, the devil says, "Oh snap, she's up"? Because that was the kind of person that Daniel was. He was the kind of person that those that plotted evil saw him as someone that's going to stop them, it's going to get in their way, it's going to mess up their plan because of his integrity, because of his relationship with God. In verse 3 it says, "Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom." And so his enemies knew that this was the plan, that he was going to be elevated to the number one position. And he was a target because he was exceptional. If you're mediocre, if you kind of keep your head down and don't want to ruffle any feathers, you probably don't want to rock the boat, you'll probably not do enough to even get noticed. There won't be quite the attacks. But frankly, Daniel was attacked because he was exceptional, because he was trustworthy, because he was above reproach. And it really bothered those that were jealous and envious of him. And they were looking for a way to come at him and to take him down. And so they looked and they couldn't find any corruption in him. It says he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. And finally, these folks in verse 5 says, "Finally these men said, we'll never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it's something to do with the law of his God." And so Daniel's enemies, knowing they couldn't find anything to bring against him, set a trap for Daniel by tricking the king. And how do you trick your king? How do you trick the boss? You appeal to his ego and to his pride. And so they manipulated the king for their own agenda.
I just love what Daniel does in response. And so starting in verse 10, it says this: "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. And 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before." And I just love the concept of being done before. And so for Daniel, there was no hesitation in how he reacts. There was no second guessing. He did what he always did. He didn't change his behavior or didn't change his venue, and he didn't react to the situation. And I think for me, like oftentimes when I face opposition or I face stressful situations, I tend to be very reactionary, right?
Yeah.
I tend to stop what I'm doing and I tend to react to the situation. And
Right.
for Daniel, he does what he's always done before. And I think that's huge for us. And his time spent with God, that wasn't something that he just did in reaction, it was habitual. And so the reason why he was prepared for this moment was all the years and all the times that he had spent before. Daniel saw his life as a trust to God. And so for me, I think we tend to amp up in our time with God based on our situations. And so when things are hard, that's when I decide I'm going to really press into God. But for Daniel, he saw the importance of continually and habitually pressing into God. And so for Daniel, when this moment happens too, he doesn't look at this moment as, you know what, this is going to be now about me versus my enemies. So there's these people coming after him, these people saying that I don't want you to be my boss. And for Daniel, he doesn't look at it as this, like me versus my enemies or me versus my king. It was about him and God. And that's why Daniel was able to deal with that. He's able to handle their ridicule, and he makes it not about me versus them. And I think for me, personally, when people do come at me for my belief in God, or whenever I do have to stand strong in my faith publicly, I think there's this temptation in me, right, that I just kind of go, you know, like I really want to make it about me versus them, and I kind of want to look at it as this great battle. But for Daniel, it was just about him and his God, and I think we can take a lot from that it's about that relational side, and that's why he was able to handle this publicly. And so the king realizes this. He realizes he's been tricked, and now that he has to do something about this. And Daniel had this really strong relationship with the king. The king did not want to punish Daniel. He didn't want to do anything, but he realized, you know what, I have to hold to the laws of my land. There's nothing really I can do. And so he takes Daniel and he throws him into a lion's den. And I love what the king says to Daniel. And I think this just shows how much trust he had in Daniel. He says this, "May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you." And so when Daniel was delivered, the next morning the king goes and looks, and he sees that Daniel has been delivered. And in that response, Daniel comes out of the lion's den. And I think this is really cool too, that Daniel in that moment doesn't tell the king to do anything. He doesn't say, "Hey, punish these people that came after me." Once again, it is just still about Daniel and God. And that's how he reacts. He always is reacting in a situation of, what's my relationship with God? And it's never me versus them.
Yeah, so good. And you know, I think about the metaphor for life being life is a test, and life is a trust, and life is a temporary assignment. And Daniel proved himself both with God and with man to be trustworthy. And that he really took those responsibilities very, very seriously and executed them as if everything he had was actually his own. And not only was it not his own, but because he was an exile, he couldn't even pass it down to his heirs. I mean, at some point they would go back. And so it really was a temporary assignment. So it really gives that sense of eternity that was in his heart, in his relationship with God. That's why he served so well. And also it was a test. And wow, did he get through a lot of tests? So quite a few. And he's really, I think, embodies the whole life's a trust, a test, and a temporary assignment. And I love the fact that he performed his work with great diligence and with great integrity. I was thinking as we were talking about this, Chris and I were talking about this, about Proverbs 22 came to mind. And it says this, in the last verse of Proverbs 22, it says, "Do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men." And I think too many times we are looking for the spotlight. I hear kids, I work with kids like say, "I want to be rich and famous."
I hear that all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, well, yeah, but what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And I think that I later in life understood that it was the skills and the work and the things that I worked at diligently daily that began to be very fulfilling for me. And that as you develop the talents and the resources God has given you, you become skillful. And when the success then happens, you can use that platform to publicly declare the gospel. We just saw this, I guess, when was Super Bowl? Was that the last weekend of January? First weekend of February?
Something like that.
Yeah, whenever the Super Bowl was. We saw Nick Foles, who worked as a backup quarterback all these years, considered retiring from football, was looking into seminary, contacted by the Kansas City Chiefs, and they brought him in to back up Alex Smith. And then later, after a year, he was sent once again back to Philadelphia to back up Carson Wentz. And as many of you know that follow football, that Carson Wentz was injured, and Nick took over, came in, helped the team win the Super Bowl, and was made the MVP. And the first words out of Nick's mouth after he won the Super Bowl, being interviewed, was, "Unbelievable, all the glory goes to God." And later in the interview he said, "I wouldn't be here without Jesus in my life." He also said this, and I love this, he said, "Stay humble, give God the glory." Now, a lot of times we think, well, I'm not a superstar like Nick Foles, or although he was a backup quarterback, remember that, holding a clipboard for a long time. So he was the backup guy, maybe not as talented as the Carson Wentz or the Alex Smith. So it's really a good illustration for us is that he didn't have maybe the abilities of Daniel being the top guy. But God really doesn't commend Daniel for just his unusual wisdom and intelligence, although he certainly did have those things, but it was for his integrity, his trustworthiness, his dependability, his availability to God. Those are things that all of us can grow in our character, and that we can be a valuable asset wherever we are, and really do kind of get that opportunity to have a platform to speak publicly for God. People can sense in your life if your life is about you or if you really care about them. I think one of the great illustrations of that is people that listen well and that are interested in what you're interested in. And we can all do that. It's a little harder for some of us than others.
Absolutely.
But they like to talk. But we really can ask questions and listen and be there to serve the entire team. And so I would commend just the things that we've learned about Daniel to really take on those characteristics, to develop that quiet time with God that is consistent. And it's really our habits that define and teach and show our character. And so then when the opportunity comes, and the opportunity will come, if we're prepared, we can make a beautiful and humble and graceful testimony to God's love and grace and glory in our lives. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you guys have a great discussion.
Yeah.
I actually enjoyed the preparation with Chris even more than the video itself. So this is
Yeah,
this is
for
great
sure.
fun, great fun. So God bless. Y'all have a great evening.